Good to see you again. This channel runs because of you. Make sure to subscribe, support with a like, and leave your thoughts below. Now, let's start the story. Wednesday night was about as ordinary as nights get. We'd had pasta for dinner, the kind Claire makes with the lemon and the capers. The one I'd requested at least a dozen times over 5 years, because it's genuinely that good. The dishes were done, the counter was wiped, and the leftover half glass of red wine had been consolidated into the bottle and put away because that's the kind of person I am at 8:30 on a Wednesday. Not exciting, just tidy. Claire was on the couch when I came in from the kitchen, feet tucked under her, a throw blanket across her lap, phone in one hand, mug of chamomile in the other. The lamp behind her giving the room that particular glow that makes everything look more settled than it might actually be. 5 years of Wednesday nights, and they all looked more or less like this. That's not a complaint. That's just what a good routine feels like from the inside. I sat down next to her. Not a production, just sat down the way you do when it's your couch and your wife and your life. My arm went along the back of the couch behind her shoulders, and I reached over and brushed a piece of her hair away from her face because it was in the way. And because that's what I do. Normal. All of it normal, stacked up like cordwood. And then she moved. Not sharply. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Nothing reactive. Nothing that read as tired or irritated the way you'd shift if you had a headache. She just adjusted, took her mug off her knee and placed it on the side table like she was creating a small barrier, then settled herself slightly further down the cushion. Deliberate. The kind of deliberate that takes a half-second of decision before the motion. She didn't look at me when she said it. I've been thinking. Her voice was level, conversational, the voice of someone delivering news, not starting a fight. I need to protect my energy more intentionally. I don't just give closeness to people who haven't earned it lately. The room didn't change. The lamp kept glowing. The TV was still on mute across the room, but something shifted in the atmosphere the way pressure changes before weather moves in. You don't see it, you just register it somewhere in the back of your chest. I sat with it for a moment, turned the words over. People who haven't earned it. In our living room, on a Wednesday, after the lemon pasta I'd asked her to make. Protect your energy, I said, not as a question, just repeating it back. She looked at her phone. What does that mean exactly? She gave a little lift of one shoulder. I've just been thinking about what I put into relationships, whether it's reciprocal. I need to be more intentional about where my closeness goes. Where my closeness goes. Her profile told me everything. The controlled set of her jaw, the slight tension around her eyes as she braced for me to push back. When I didn't, when I just said, okay, there was a brief flicker of something. Surprise maybe, or mild disappointment that the first exchange hadn't gone the way she'd rehearsed it. Okay, she said, sure, if that's where you are. She went back to her phone. A few minutes passed. Then I got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. When I came back to the doorway, she was texting rapidly, a small private smile turning one corner of her mouth up in a way that had nothing to do with me or the room. The smile of someone reporting in. She finished, set the phone face down, and went back to whatever she'd been reading. I sat in the armchair across the room instead of back on the couch. She didn't notice. That's the part that stayed with me walking up the stairs. Not the phrase, not the distance, but the fact that she didn't notice where I'd sat. The repositioning was about establishing a principle, not about me specifically. Protect your energy. Sure, but you only rehearse lines when someone else wrote them for you. Her next morning, she came downstairs like Wednesday hadn't happened. No residual weight, no sideways glance to see how I was carrying it. Just Claire at 7:15 on a Thursday in her work clothes, pouring coffee with the efficiency of someone who has a full day and nothing to revisit. As far as she was concerned, the thing had been said, the thing had landed, and now we were on to the next phase. The next phase, it turned out, was a list. I need to ask you a few things before I head out, she said, phone propped against the backsplash. The contractor about the bathroom quote. His name is Jim. He's been calling during my work hours, and I keep missing him. Could you catch him today? Sure, I said, and then noticed I'd said it automatically, the way years of being a team trains you to answer before you've processed the question. So I stopped, set my coffee mug down on the counter. She didn't notice. Already on to item 2. Also, my sister's birthday dinner, RPM Italian on the 14th, Saturday night, table for 8. You're better at those reservation calls. Would you mind handling that? I didn't say anything. She glanced up briefly, then back down. And one more. There's a donations bag in my car, the blue tote. The Goodwill on Clybourne. Could you drop it on your way? She looked at me then, fully, for the first time since she'd come downstairs. The look of someone who has made a reasonable series of requests and is waiting for the reasonable series of confirmations. I'm going to step back on all of that, I said. The spoon stopped moving in her cup. Sorry. Stepping back. I need to protect my energy. Same voice she'd used the night before, level, conversational, not angry. I don't just give it to people who haven't earned it lately. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the ones we were used to. What? She said, not a question, just the word flat. You heard me. She set her mug on the counter harder than necessary. That is not the same thing. Which part isn't? Those are practical things, Garrett. The contractor, the reservation, those are household things. Completely different from what I was talking about last night. How? Because she stopped, picked her mug back up, put it down again. Because what I said was about personal space, about emotional availability. This is just logistics. So when you said you needed to protect your energy, you meant a specific kind, not all energy. Yes, exactly. Then you should have been more specific. Her chin came up a little. I shouldn't have to spell it out. Okay, but I'm working from what you actually said, not what you meant. And what you said was that you don't give closeness to people who haven't earned it lately. And then, so I'm applying the same principle. We're apparently recalibrating what that means around here. She stared at me with an expression I didn't have a good name for. Not anger, more like the look you get when the board rearranges itself into something you didn't plan for. You're being deliberately difficult. I'm being consistent. Garrett, you said it last night. I'm just listening. I poured the rest of my coffee into my travel mug. If you want to redefine how we talk about energy in this house, that's fine. But the definition has to work for both of us, or it's not a definition. It's just a rule that applies to one person. Her jaw tightened. That's not what this is. Then what is it? She looked at me for a long moment, working through it, looking for the angle that made her version of the principle different from mine in a way she could actually articulate. She didn't find it, not right then. This conversation isn't over, she said finally. No rush. I've got all week. I picked up my bag and my keys, said I hoped her day went well, and left. 30 seconds down the driveway, she was already on the phone. Not the contractor. The tone was wrong, too low, too fast, with the same undercurrent of the previous night's reporting back smile now translated into sound. She wasn't processing. The rest of the week had a texture to it. Not explosive. Nothing was thrown. Nobody raised their voice. The house stayed clean, and the dinners got made. From the outside, you'd have clocked it as a normal week for a normal couple. Inside it, the current ran differently. Claire tried several approaches. I'll give her credit for range. Thursday evening, she asked me to help move a storage bin from the spare room to the basement. I was in the living room with a book. Stepping back, I said. She stood in the doorway. It would take you 2 minutes. 2 minutes is still 2 minutes. She moved it herself. 4 trips, some creative commentary from the hallway. I turned the page. The blue tote was still in her car, by the way. It sat there all week. Friday morning, she was running late and needed me to confirm an RSVP for a work event. Could I just handle it while she got ready? I'm not available for that right now, I said. She blinked. That's not even the same phrase. No, but the logic holds. She made the call herself, heels in one hand, running slightly late. She'd always been perfectly capable of it. That was, in a way, the whole point. Friday evening she chose sweetness, and I want to be honest, it almost worked. She made my favorite dinner, the short ribs, for hours, 2 pots, and when I walked in, the house smelled like a good decision. It was warm, the conversation easy, and for about 40 minutes it felt exactly like the kind of evening that makes you feel okay about everything. I let myself enjoy it. Then, when the plates were mostly done, she mentioned very casually that her car was overdue for an oil change. She hated dealing with the dealership. They always pushed additional services. Could I call and handle the conversation when she dropped it off? I looked at her across the table. Stepping back, I said 2 words. Something shifted in her eyes. Not anger this time, something quieter. She set her wine glass down carefully and looked at me with an expression that had some calculation in it, and underneath the calculation, the first real edge of worry. You're not going to do this forever, she said. Probably not, but I'm doing it now. She got up and started clearing the plates, and the warmth of the evening was still technically present, but thinner, like a coating worn through in one spot. We watched TV after, sitting the careful distance apart that had become our default. Saturday afternoon, I was doing laundry. Relevant context: our laundry room shares a wall, a thin one, with the back porch. On a normal Saturday, it wouldn't matter. But Claire was out there with Nora, her friend from 2 blocks over, and Stacy was on speakerphone. I ran in to switch a load, and their voices came through clearly enough. Enough that I stood there with a damp towel in my hands and listened. Stacy was talking. "He's not going to keep it up," she said. The voice of someone who has decided to be the expert in the room. Men never do. They fold because they hate the awkward more than they hate the unfairness. "Just stay the course," he said, stepping back to the oil change call last night, Claire said, and then just sat there. "I made him his favorite dinner." I heard. Stacy, patient. The way a coach gets patient right before they explain something basic. That's exactly what you should have done. He's supposed to try harder, not echo you back at himself. "But I'm the one who started it," Claire said, uncertain in a way that told me she hadn't fully committed to the belief she was voicing. Which is exactly the point. You set the standard because you needed to establish that you're not just available on demand. He's supposed to respond by stepping up. Instead, he's copying you. That's a control tactic. He's trying to make you feel bad for establishing your own needs. Nora said something I didn't catch. And, I don't know. It sounds like he's just using her logic back at her, which is kind of, Nora, Stacy said. Do you want her to have a marriage, or do you want her to manage a situation? Those are 2 different projects. A pause. "So, what do I do?" Claire asked. "You escalate." A pause on the line. Then Stacy's voice again, even and certain. "Your parents are coming for dinner Sunday, right? And his brother always comes over for the game?" "Danny? Yeah. He comes every Sunday." "Perfect. You make a completely normal request in front of all of them. When he pulls the stepping back thing in front of your dad, it's going to look exactly like what it is. A grown man being petty over a mild conversation from Wednesday night." "My mom likes him," Claire said quietly. "Your mom will see what she's looking at once she watches him refuse something basic in front of her. Parents don't take their kids' partners over themselves when the partner is being obviously unreasonable." "Nora, softer. I mean, is he being unreasonable?" Because from what you described, the thing Claire said Wednesday was also kind of Nora. And then Claire said it directly to the phone. "Stacy, is he being unreasonable or not?" Claire was establishing healthy communication about her needs. Stacy said, with the firmness of someone closing a discussion. "What he's doing is reactive and punitive. They're not comparable." I stood there another moment, holding the towel. Then I moved the load to the dryer and turned the machine on. There it was. Wednesday hadn't been a spontaneous moment. It had been the opening line of a sequence designed to end with me working for her approval. When the sequence hadn't played out as drawn up, the answer wasn't to reconsider it. The answer was to bring in an audience. Stacy had been divorced 18 months and had repackaged that into a philosophy of relationship management. Now field testing on my marriage. Renata, whom I'd heard Claire mention at least a dozen times in 6 weeks, had handed Stacy the draft, and Stacy had turned it into a playbook. I set the detergent back on the shelf. They wanted an audience. Fine. An audience hears the whole story, not just the version prepared in advance, and it was going to land differently than they planned. When Claire came inside an hour later, slightly flushed from the cold, I asked if she'd had a good conversation with Nora. "Great," she said. "Really nice afternoon." "Good," I said, and went back to my book. Sunday arrived the way the last step before a long drop does. Inevitable. I'd slept fine, which probably says something. Claire was up earlier than usual. When I came downstairs at 7:30, the counters were cleaner than they needed to be, and she had a list going on her phone. The energy of someone preparing a stage. Danny showed up at 2 the way Danny always shows up. Bright small cooler of beer, a jersey for a team whose season had already ended, talking before he'd fully cleared the front door. The least complicated person I know. He handed me a beer, dropped onto the couch, and looked at the TV. "Game starts at 2:30, he said. "Tell me the day is going fine." "Complicated week," I said. He looked at me sideways. "How complicated?" "You'll see." He took a long pull of his beer with the expression of a man who has learned that when his older brother says "you'll see," the right response is to settle in. Claire came out of the kitchen looking entirely at ease, warm with Danny, asking about his work, touching his arm when something was funny. Nothing in her manner suggested anything was coming. If you hadn't been paying the kind of attention I'd been paying all week, You'd have thought, this is a woman enjoying a Sunday. At 3:45, with the pregame winding down and Danny settling into his second beer, she came into the living room from the kitchen doorway. She sat on the arm of the couch near Danny, close to him, visible to both of us, framed perfectly, casual, domestic, witnessed. "Garrett," she said, in the same voice she'd used Thursday morning, "I forgot to grab a few things for dinner. Would you mind running over to the Whole Foods on North Avenue? Just heavy cream and the sourdough from their bakery. My parents are getting here around 4:30, so there's plenty of time." She looked at me the way you look at someone when you've already decided what their answer is. I let the pregame play for one more second. Then I looked directly at her. "I'm stepping back on that. I need to protect my energy, and I don't give it to people who haven't earned it lately." Full version. The whole thing. Danny's beer stopped moving about 6 inches from his mouth. His eyes went to me, then to Claire, then back again, with the careful tracking of someone watching a conversation detonate. "I'm sorry," Claire said, composure slipping just slightly at the edges. "What did you just say?" "You heard me, Garrett." Her voice had shifted, controlled, but with something heated underneath it now. "I have company. My parents are going to be here in 45 minutes. I know what you need," I said. "And I'm stepping back." Danny set his beer on the coffee table with the deliberateness of a man removing himself from a transaction. "Maybe I could run over and grab it." "I don't mind. Stay," Claire said sharply enough that Danny stopped mid-movement. "This is between me and my husband, who has apparently decided that helping with dinner is beneath him." "Helping with dinner," I said. Interesting framing. I looked at Danny. "Right, she told me Wednesday night that she needs to protect her energy and doesn't give closeness to people who haven't earned it lately. So, I've been applying the same standard all week. Apparently, that makes me the problem." Danny turned to Claire slowly. "She said that?" "It's not the same thing," Claire said. And I could hear the edge that comes when an argument you've prepared for starts going sideways before you've reached the part you prepared for. "What I said was about my personal needs. This is just a grocery run." "You used the word energy," I said. "Energy is energy. You're taking it out of context." "What was the context?" She looked at me, then at Danny, who was watching her the way you watch someone you like, but can't currently help, then back at me. "You're doing this on purpose," she said, in front of Danny. "I'm doing this because it's a Sunday in our house, and Danny happens to be here, same as your parents are going to happen to be here in about 40 minutes. I kept my voice level. "Speaking of which, I was in the laundry room Saturday afternoon." Something changed in her face. A stillness settled across it that hadn't been there a second before. "You heard," she said. "The acoustics in this house are something else." Danny looked between us, slower now, the dawning expression of a man starting to understand what week he'd missed. "Wait, what happened Saturday?" "She was on the back porch with Nora and Stacy on speakerphone," I said, "working through the plan for today. The dinner, the request, the audience. Your name came up, actually. Stacy figured that a grown man refusing something basic in front of his in-laws and his brother would look petty enough that everyone would pressure him to back down." Danny sat back against the cushions. "Wow." "Stacy has an interesting framework for marriage," I said, "given that she's been divorced for 18 months. Claire's color was rising. "You weren't supposed to hear that." "No, I agreed, but I did. That's an invasion of privacy. You were listening to a private—" "I was doing laundry in the laundry room, which shares a wall with the porch." I let that sit. I didn't go looking for it. But once I heard it, I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't. She looked at Danny for support, or at least neutrality, but he was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has a clear opinion and is fighting the instinct to share it. The front door opened. Ruth came in carrying a covered casserole dish, Stephen a step behind with 2 bottles of wine. They both paused in the foyer when they registered the air in the room. Ruth set the dish on the entry table and looked between the 3 of us without speaking. "Did we come at a bad time?" Stephen asked. "Bro," Claire said, in a voice that meant yes. "Actually, good timing. Mom, maybe you can help me explain to Garrett that when your wife asks you to pick something up for dinner, the correct response isn't to say you're protecting your energy." Ruth looked at me. "Why are you protecting your energy from your wife?" "Because she told me Wednesday night that she needs to protect hers from me," I said. Her exact words were that she doesn't give closeness to people who haven't earned it lately. I'm just people in that framing, so I figured the standard applied both ways. Stephen set the wine bottles down on the entry table with a careful control that suggested he was using the motion to think. "She said that?" Wednesday evening after dinner. Ruth turned to look at her daughter with an expression I'd only seen a handful of times in 5 years. Not angry, but recognition and disappointment sharing the same space. Sophia, she said quietly. Claire's full name. The one her mother used when she meant business. What were you thinking? I was establishing a boundary, Claire said, the certainty in her voice thinner now, more brittle, about my needs in this relationship. By telling your husband he's just people, that's not— It wasn't meant it's what you said, Stephen told her. Not unkindly, just the way a man delivers a fact. Ruth's eyes narrowed slightly, and she said Renata's name. Not as a question, as a statement. I've been listening to you talk about that woman for 2 months, she said. Everything she says, you carry home like instruction. How long has she been separated from her husband? Claire's jaw went tight. That's not relevant. It's pretty relevant, Stephen said. Renata has some strong opinions about emotional availability, I said, which would have carried more weight if her marriage had lasted long enough to generate the experiences she's drawing from. Danny made a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh, pressed his fist against his mouth, and looked at the ceiling. Ruth set her purse next to the casserole. The phrase protect your energy, people who haven't earned it. That's Renata's language. I've heard you use pieces of it the last 2 times you called me. Did you come up with it yourself? A long pause. Claire said, I've been talking to Stacy too. Stacy, Ruth said, and the name landed with a flatness that contained a full opinion. She has a perspective on Stacy has been divorced for a year and a half, Ruth said. And she runs a group chat. That one I've heard about. Didn't think you were taking it seriously. The room had gone very quiet. Danny had both hands wrapped around his beer, studying it. Stephen had picked up one of the wine bottles and was reading the label with the attention of a man who knows when to let a conversation breathe. Claire looked around the room. At me, at her parents, at Danny. And for the first time since Wednesday night, the prepared architecture of the week collapsed. There was nothing left to stand behind, no phrase to reach for, no version of the story that made what she'd done look like something other than what it was. I need some air, she said. The back door. Then her footsteps on the porch. A moment later, the low sound of her voice, calling Stacy. The 4 of us redistributed around the living room in the quiet after Claire left. Stephen opened the wine. Ruth settled in the armchair by the window. Danny stared at the TV, which had moved on to actual game footage, though nobody suggested turning up the sound. I'm just going to say, Danny offered eventually, that if Melissa ever told me something like that, I would have done exactly what you did. You should have called us earlier in the week, Ruth said to me. I didn't know how far it had gone until Saturday. I looked out the back window. Claire was pacing near the fence, breath visible in the cold air. And honestly, I wanted to see how Sunday played out. Stephen put a glass of wine in my hand without asking. I didn't want it. That Stacy has been a problem since she split from her husband, he said. She talks about relationships the way some men talk about a game plan. Strategy, leverage, who's up and who's down. She told Claire I was gaslighting her by using her language back at her. I said. Stephen made a sound that communicated his view without requiring words. Don't let pride keep you from meeting her halfway, Ruth said, looking at me directly. If she comes back ready to actually talk, she comes back ready to talk. I'll be right here, I said. Good. Danny turned the game volume up just slightly, enough to give us something to not be watching. The wine was good. About 20 minutes later, the back door opened. Claire came in from the cold, cheeks flushed, eyes red in a way that wasn't from the wind. She'd gone looking for reinforcement and come back empty-handed. She sat at the kitchen table, both hands flat on the surface, looking at them. Didn't perform any of the composure she'd been maintaining all week. I need to tell you what actually happened, she said. Everyone went still. Ruth in her chair, Stephen by the counter, Danny holding his beer. I sat across from her, close enough to hear, far enough to see her face. She looked at me. 6 weeks ago, Renata started talking to me at lunch about something she called intentional distance. The idea that if you're always warm and available in a relationship, your partner stops treating it as something valuable. That withholding closeness creates appreciation. She paused. I thought it was interesting at first, like a theory, something to consider. Not necessarily something to do. She looked at her hands. Then I thought I had been tired. Work had been a lot. I was looking for something to explain a feeling I couldn't actually name. And Renata's framework gave me a language for it. Even though the feeling probably wasn't about you at all. Quietly. Probably wasn't about us. Okay, I said. Stacy took it further. She's got a group chat. She calls it standards only, which should have been a sign, and she shares scripts. Actual scripts. Language you can use in specific situations to establish a dynamic. The phrase I used Wednesday night, the energy thing, the people who haven't earned it. That was Stacy's, written in my notes app 2 days before I said it to you, and carried around like a tool ever since. Ruth made a small sound. Stephen looked at the kitchen window. The Sunday plan was entirely Stacy's idea. She said bringing in family. Making a request in front of Danny and my parents would create enough social pressure that you'd back down because no man wants to look petty in front of people he respects. Flat, no spin. I was uncomfortable with it from the start, but I told myself it was just being strategic, which is a nice word for something that isn't a nice thing. She looked up at me. I called her from the backyard just now. She told me to hold the line. And then said you were manipulating me by using my language back at me and that my parents would come around if I stayed firm. A short pause. I told her I was done with the chat and done with the calls. She said I was making a mistake. Claire's voice didn't waver. I hung up. I called Renata too. She was more confused than anything. I don't think she understood how far it had gone. She looked directly at me now. Not past me. Not around me. I don't want to run a strategy on my husband. I want to be married to you. And I'm sorry I let someone talk me into thinking those two things were compatible because they're not. And I think I knew that even at the time. I just let myself not know it for a while. I looked at her face, the real one, not the composed version she'd been wearing since Wednesday, and thought about what the week had actually been. Not a fight, not a crisis, just a bad script running in a good person's mouth until someone held up a mirror. I pulled out the chair beside her and sat down in it. Not a speech, just that. Ruth exhaled through her nose. A soft sound, not quite a sigh. The sound of something releasing. Stephen looked at the window. What were you actually feeling? I asked. Before any of this, before Renata. She was quiet for a moment. I genuinely don't know anymore. That's the real answer. A pause. I think I might have just been tired and turned it into something it wasn't. Borrowed somebody else's story and tried to wear it. Then that's what we figure out, I said. Just us. Without the chat. From the doorway, Danny cleared his throat. The sound of a man who has been standing very still for several minutes and is ready to re-enter the world. I don't want to interrupt what is clearly an important moment, he said, but that casserole smells incredible, and I have been quietly providing emotional support for approximately 2 hours, which I believe should earn me something. Ruth laughed. It broke across the room like a window opening, sudden and real, the first fully unguarded moment since she'd walked through the door. Stephen's shoulders dropped an inch. Something in my own chest did the same. Set the table, Ruth said to Danny. Happily, Danny said. Finally, a task I've earned. We ate dinner. Ruth's casserole was excellent. The heavy cream that never made it to Whole Foods turned out to be irrelevant. The dish didn't need it. Danny ate 2 helpings and provided commentary on the game he'd mostly missed. Stephen talked about a porch renovation, and the weight of the day settled into something manageable. After her parents left and Danny went a half hour after hugging Claire at the door with the genuine awkwardness of a man who doesn't do feelings easily, but wanted to acknowledge them. We were alone for the first time since Wednesday. The quiet had a different texture than the quiet of the previous 4 days. That had been 2 people carefully not touching something. This was just quiet. Claire was sitting on the edge of the bed when I came upstairs, changed out of her dinner clothes, hair down, looking wrung out. Not in a bad way. In the way you look after something that needed to happen finally does, and takes the tension with it. How long were you going to keep it up? She asked. Honestly, I don't know. But I wasn't going to stop before Sunday. Because you heard Saturday. Because of Saturday, sure. But also because it needed to run until it ran out of road. I sat on my side of the bed facing her. If the audience was going to be there anyway, the whole story might as well be in the room with them. She was quiet for a moment. The laundry room. That wall is genuinely something. The previous owners really skimped. She made a sound that was almost, not quite, but almost a laugh. Small and tired and real. For what it's worth, she said, you can have your energy back. I'll consider whether you've earned it. She grabbed the pillow and threw it at me. I caught it. Fran, something that had been coiled tight since Wednesday evening released. Just like that, between the pillow and the catching of it. I handed it back to her. Here's what I've thought about since. The strategy only works if the other person doesn't understand the mechanism. It depends on you accepting that the rules have changed and the right response is to try harder within the new framework, rather than look at the framework itself and ask why it's shaped the way it is. Once you see the shape of it, you can't unsee it. Once both people apply the same logic, the logic falls apart because it was never about energy or closeness or what people have earned. It was a map for making one person the center of gravity and the other person the one who orbits. What they never built into the model was the possibility that the other person might just be paying attention. We weren't going to be opponents. We both said that over the course of a Sunday that neither of us had enjoyed, said it in front of people we both loved, in language neither of us could walk back from. That gives things a weight that sticks. Claire fell asleep before me, on her side the way she always sleeps, and the room had its ordinary quiet back. The week felt like something finished, the way things can be when they've been genuinely resolved and not just set aside. Good enough for me. 4 months later, on a Saturday morning in early summer, I was on the back porch with coffee. The neighborhood was doing what Chicago neighborhoods do in early summer. Fully committed now, the kind of warmth that doesn't apologize. The tree in the back corner had gone from that almost too green of new leaves to the deep settled green of a season that knows what it's doing. And the coffee was the good kind I'd started buying after Claire pointed out we spent more on wine than on coffee, which was an indefensible allocation. She came out the back door with a second mug, made the way I take it, which she knows, which I've never had to tell her. We sat without talking for a minute, just watching the 2 green trees and the 2 blue sky. She'd been going to therapy since February because she wanted to understand what had made Stacy's framework feel persuasive. She'd mentioned what her therapist called it, borrowed distress, the idea that you absorb someone else's unresolved pain and apply it to your own life as though it belongs there, especially when you're already tired and looking for an explanation. The language becomes your language before you've checked whether it fits. That's a good name for it, I'd said. Right, she'd sounded entirely like herself, not a version assembled from someone else's notes app. Now she sat next to me, and after a minute or two she said, I took a test this morning. I looked at her. She was already smiling. The particular smile of someone with news they've been sitting on for a few hours, waiting for the right moment. My hands did something strange with the coffee mug, put it down, picked it up again, set it down more carefully on the armrest. Yeah, I said. April, the doctor thinks. So I've got 9 months of you telling me to protect my energy, I said. She looked at me sideways. You know it's closer to 11 the way you handle things. I reached over and took her hand. She turned her palm up to take mine, the way she does, the way she's done for 5 years. I was glad we'd both stayed long enough to find out. All right, here's the bottom line and why it actually matters to you. What actually saved this marriage wasn't the Sunday confrontation, the parents siding with him, or even the apology. It was Claire calling Stacy from the backyard and choosing differently. She'd gone outside looking for backup and instead got told to double down, hold the line, and make her husband feel like he was the problem. And she said no. That moment, choosing the marriage over the group chat, choosing honesty over the strategy, that's where it actually turned. Ruth, Stephen, and Danny didn't fix anything. They just created the conditions where Claire had to look at what she was doing without anyone helping her spin it. The rest was her, which is also why it held. Nobody talked her into forgiving him. Nobody talked him into forgiving her. They figured out what had actually happened and decided it wasn't worth burning the whole thing down over someone else's bad advice. Listen, an apology that comes because someone got caught means very little. An apology that comes because someone genuinely saw what they were doing and chose to stop, that one actually changes something.